What can we make if we buy 2 copies of the new One Piece film starter deck? Let's talk about it. What's up, Captains? Welcome back to The Other Decks. My name's Casual Dobo, and today we're going to be taking a look at the new One Piece film starter deck that recently just came out, aka also known as the Purple Shanks starter deck. This obviously features a lot of characters from the One Piece film universe, and so I guess as a quick preface, I apologize for any mispronunciations of any names. Baccarat, Baccarat. I'm going to always constantly double guess myself. Just because I'm not too familiar with the film world, but the deck itself is actually pretty awesome, and there's some pretty wild abilities in here that not only fit in with sort of the film theme of this particular starter deck, but can probably fit into a couple of other purple decks that you can build as we get further along into set 1. So super excited to jump into that. But just as a quick sort of personal thing before we hop into that, for the One Piece fans, because I said in my last Digimon video, but I want to let y'all know, we hit 1,000 subs. If you follow me on Twitter, you probably already know. But yeah, we hit 1,000 subs, and not only that, but we are actually fully officially partnered with YouTube. And these are just massive accomplishments. I do want to do something kind of big to sort of celebrate it, just trying to figure out, what's possible, what's feasible. But first of all, thank you so much to everyone who is supporting the channel, whether it's Digimon, whether it's One Piece, whether that's just watching the videos, hitting the like button, commenting, down below. I do try and interact with everyone that I can. And honestly, it's an awesome accomplishment, honestly. So thank you so much. But anyway, you came to this video not to hear about that, but to talk about the film starter deck. So let's go ahead and jump right into the deck profile. Alright, and like with all the One Piece decks we do start off with our Dawn Curve, and so this just gives us a little bit of a snapshot of what we're working with here. And honestly, the spikes are a little weird compared to most, right? So we do have some big spikes in the 2s. A lot of our big utility plays do come in the 2 cost range, but a lot of the characters we want to be working with are actually going to be pretty high cost in this one. This is definitely a deck where you want to go second, 100%, just to get that extra draw as well as that extra Dawn. And because my Dawn Curve only really goes into like the 7 and it goes like 7+ or whatever, you can't quite see it, but there are some pretty high things. That spike is combined with 7 and 8s, right? And then the most important thing that I want to mention here is that we are running 30 counters. And this is important because this is what I would consider more to be a mid to long range deck. One where you want to make sure that you have your Dawn out, ready, available, and then go in with some of your monster characters. And in order to get there, you do need to have a decent amount of counters available. Obviously run all of the plus 2000s, but being able to sort of counter some of the smaller attacks to make sure that your life is healthy enough for when you get into that sort of mid game is incredibly crucial, But that is enough of the Dawn Curve. Let's just go ahead and jump into the actual ratios of the deck profile. Alright, and here we are at the deck profile, and to start us off, let's talk about our leader, Shanks. So this is a standard monocolor leader, 5k power, 5 life, and then activate main once per turn, Dawn -3. Your film type cards gain plus 2000 power during this turn. So once again, I think this highlights sort of the mid-ranginess of this deck, in that it is Dawn -3, kind of a steep cost, obviously not the biggest one that we've seen amongst purple, but still, -3 Dawn is kind of wild. But all of your film type cards gain plus 2000 power for the turn. So not just for the battle, for the turn. This kind of indicates that, at least my interpretation, you want to kind of have a big, like a wider board of film type characters, and then you're going to be doing a lot of swinging and hitting towards the mid to late game to try and close out the game, essentially. So yeah, this is a great closeout ability. It's also a great ability to handle some of the more problematic characters in the game, such as Captain Useless Kid, the character card. And I think this deck does have enough firepower to handle that pretty well, to be honest. But that's our leader. Going into our characters, we do have 4 copies of Buena Fiesta. So this is a 1 cost, 0k power But this is our counter plus 2000, so we had to have the automatic 4, just because those are so important, especially in the starter deck sort of meta, and really in any meta. But this is also our searcher, so on play, look at top 5 cards of your deck, reveal one film type card other than Buena Fiesta, and then add to your hand, bottom deck the rest. So I think this is actually a pretty cool and well designed card, just because it forces you to think about whether or not you want that ability to search for some of your sort of harder hitting characters that you'll see in the rest of the deck profile, or to keep it in hand for that plus 2000 counter. And honestly, if this was me playing it, I would mostly keep some of these in hand. I'd maybe search once or twice during an actual match, but try and save at least 2 or 3 of them for those counters. Next up, we do have 4 copies of Anne. This is our cheap blocker, right? This is the 2 cost to play, 3k power blocker. I was debating whether to put a full 4 copies of this, but 2 reasons for that rationale. One, it is such a blocker heavy meta, so having the full sort of play sets of both blockers, in my opinion, was pretty important. And also, it kind of is one of our, cheaper plays that we can do in this deck. You'll see later on, we do have some pretty high costed characters, and one of the problems that I've encountered in some of my experiments with high costed characters is that you're not really playing as many towards the late game as you might expect with sort of the progression of how Dawn is. So the cheap cost characters are still very important, just to make sure that everything is still flowing appropriately. And so that's why 4 copies of Anne, even though Anne does not have any counter potential. Next up, we do have 4 copies of Karina. So 2 cost to play, 3000 power, but does have an ability. Activate main once per turn, rest this character, and then send 1 film type card from your hand to trash. Then, if your opponent has more Dawn cards on their field than you, add 2 cards from your Dawn deck and set it as rested. Also, it has counter potential plus 1000. So I was also debating Karina and her inclusion at 4 copies in this deck. That's mostly because her ability is kind of niche, at least I thought so initially. However, with all of the Dawn minus abilities that we have in purple in general, this can trigger a couple of different times throughout the game if your opponent allows Karina to stay up. And then this is especially useful if you're playing against a purple ramp deck, such as like a king, right? This will allow you to sort of level the playing field a little bit. But the most important aspect of Karina is that Karina does have counter plus 1000. So even if you never use Karina out on the battlefield, using her for the counter potential is incredibly important. So that's why 4 copies. Next up, we have 2 copies of Dr. Indigo. So this is a vanilla, 2 cost, 4k power, but counter plus 1000. And mostly I put into 2 copies just for the counter potential, right? I know there was that one card that it's a character card that has a trigger, play this card, that you can swap in here. But mostly I was looking for the counter potential and someone who can sort of easily go up to a viable attacker. So at 4000, you just need to add 1 Dawn onto Dr. Indigo in order for this person to swing. Then obviously if you use the Shanks ability, it becomes a viable attacker naturally. So Dr. Indigo is pretty solid. But yeah, mostly just needed 2 more cards and I needed 2 more counters. Next up, we do have 4 copies of Baccarat. Apologies to this character for most likely mispronouncing their name. But this character, Baccarat, I'm going to always constantly double guess myself. But Baccarat does have 3 costs to play, 5000 power, and counter plus 1000. The reason why we have this person at 4 copies is because they are a natural attacker, right? 5000 power can naturally swing, you don't need any Dawn attached. And also counter potential is really good. And especially for this sort of starter deck meta, these natural attackers are just really important in order to just keep the game flowing and keep putting that pressure onto your opponent. Next up, we do have 4 copies of Ain. 4 to play, 5000 power, so a natural attacker, but also has the added benefit of on play, add 1 Dawn from your Dawn deck, and rest it. So essentially this is our character version of Onigashima for the starter deck. That is, the natural attacker is very nice. Unfortunately, no counter potential, but the ability sort of makes up for it. Next up, we do have 4 copies of Uta. So this is 4 cost to play, 5000 power, counter plus 1000, so this is very nice. This is a very good card. And then is a blocker. and also has an on-block ability where Dawn -1, you can rest one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 5 or less. So if you've seen any sort of starter decks and any optimized starter decks, you know there are a lot of very scary characters that are cost 5 or less. So the ability to rest one of these on block is pretty nice. And Uta is one of the key components of how we sort of stall into that sort of mid to late game. Next up, we do have 4 copies of Bins. This is our 4 cost to play 6k attacker, counter plus 1000. So kind of the equivalent of Frankie in the red starter deck, and very similar to Baccarat. This is to apply pressure onto our opponent and make sure that we're able to sort of swing into them as many times as we can. Kind of force them to use resources and really just think about how to deal with them, especially if they don't have an ideal hand, you know? Always good to make the opponent think. Next up, and this one might be a little bit of a spicy take, but I only have 2 copies of Guild Tesoro. 5 cost to play, 6000 power, and when attacking Dawn -2, draw 2 cards. Now you might be wondering to yourself, this is a really fantastic card. Why do you only have 2 copies of it? And I will agree with you on the first statement. It is well, I guess I agree with the second statement as well, because there's only 2 copies. But it is a fantastic card, not gonna lie. 6000 power, it is obviously above the threshold for being a natural attacker. So when attacking Dawn -2, draw 2 cards. Getting more resources for 2 Dawn, that's, you know, in the world of Full Metal Alchemist, that is equivalent exchange. However, it doesn't have any counter potential, which is something that I do think is pretty important for this particular deck, to have a bunch of counters to get into sort of that mid to late game. But the other thing is, I don't think there's enough ramp in this particular deck to warrant the Dawn -2 when attacking and not have counter potential, right? I think it's a combination of all those elements together that make me wonder, do I want 4 copies of this in my deck? And if you think so, let me know in the comments below. Would love to hear your thoughts on it. But the fact that it doesn't have counter potential, the fact that it's 5 costs, so if you're going first, that would come out at minimum turn 3, right? I don't know if it's worth it for the draw. If I had, you know, access to Onigashima, or maybe even some of the other ramp cards that we have in the actual set, then Guild Tesoro becomes a much more viable character card. But talking about strictly in sort of the optimized starter deck, I think having it at 2 copies is probably the smarter play. At least potentially more consistent. Next up, we do have 4 copies of Shiki, so 6 cost to play, 7000 power, but has counter plus 1000, so it kind of has the trifecta that we're looking for in a card. A little expensive, but it has a pretty interesting ability. If you have 8 or more Dawn cards on your field, this character cannot be KO'd in battle. So if you manage your Dawn correctly, this thing essentially has the power to become indestructible, at least in battle. Obviously, it can still be deleted. Sorry, that's Digimon turn. It can still be KO'd by your opponent's effects or event cards, but in terms of battle, it's good. And being able to have a 7k attacker sustain and last on the board is pretty powerful, to be honest. And the fact that it does have counter potential is incredibly important for what I think the deck should do, and thus that's why we have 4 copies of it. Moving on, we do have 3 copies of Z. So this is 7 cost to play, 8000 power. So this is really kind of where we get into the meat and potatoes of the attacking core of this deck. But Z has some pretty interesting abilities. So if this character battles with a strike attribute character, this character gains plus 3000 during this turn. During the turn, which is kind of wild. But obviously that sounds very specific, right? But its activate main once per turn ability, so Dawn -1, so return a Dawn to Dawn deck. This character gains plus 2000 power during this turn as well. And this is really important because, as we mentioned, the character kid card from the set is, you know, incredibly problematic, right? You need to be able to handle it, and this naturally can handle it. Then if you add plus 2000, add the Shanks ability, you know, this can be a 12,000 attacker, right? And then your opponent really has to decide between keeping the kid card alive or utilizing resources to keep it on the field. So yeah, Z is a fantastic card that we primarily use to punch through our opponent's defenses. And for this one and the next card that I'm going to show off, this is kind of the reason why I wanted so many counters, because these character cards while super powerful, do not have counters, right? But we do want to run a lot of them, and if you've ever tried to optimize just strictly the red starter deck, the Luffy starter deck, the fact that so many of those cards that are so key to that strategy don't have counters, I think really hurts it in the overall sort of starter deck meta. So I had that sort of in mind when I was building this, so that's why we only have 3 copies of Z, and we only have 3 copies of Douglas Bullet. So Bullet is a cost to play, 10,000 power naturally, then activate main once per turn, Dawn -4, rest up to 2 of your opponent's cost 6 or lower characters, then this character gains double attack for the turn. So naturally you can just use this to try and crash into your opponent's character kid card. It can go toe to toe with the Shanks, the secret rare from the set. But more importantly, and the way most people want to use this is as a finisher, right? So you do need to put it onto the board first. It does not have rush, but once it's able to attack, being able to rest 2 of our opponent's characters, 6 cost or lower, that takes care of most of the blockers in the set and in the starter decks. So that way you are able to just go into your opponent's leader at 10k naturally with double attack. That way if the attack is successful, which at 10k, honestly, it should be, your opponent would then lose 2 of their life cards. So yeah, I can definitely see this being used as if your opponent has 2 life, you have a Douglas Bullet that's available to attack, activate his ability, send it into the leader, and that way knock him down to 0 life. That way the pressure is on for your opponent to defend, utilizing whatever is in their hand in order to prevent the last attack for the win. So yeah, with a couple of characters I mentioned that the pressure is really on when it comes to their presence being on the board, and nothing encapsulates that more than Douglas Bullet, especially considering at 8 cost, 10,000 power, there's actually not a whole lot that can get rid of it without having to do some weird wombo combo, right? Immune to the 7 cost to play Doflamingo from the starter decks, right? Immune to Sables, right? Realistically, besides swinging over this thing, what you need the sort of round table Robin combo, right? Some sort of combo utilizing Otama Juggle going into a a jet pistol. It is incredibly difficult to get rid of 10Ks unless you just drop down that board wipe Kaido, right? So yeah, Douglas Bullet, fantastic card. Expensive, but fantastic card. And that does it for the characters. Let's move on to our events. So 4 copies of Union Armado. This is our counter event, so up to one of our film type kit leaders or characters gains plus 4,000 power during the turn for 2 costs. That's not bad, but also if this card is a character, that character cannot be KO'd during the turn. So yeah, this is actually pretty cool because we can essentially use this with Uta to give her plus 4,000, making her a 9k blocker, and then also protecting her for the rest of the turn, which is awesome. And then obviously we can do this with some of our character cards, especially ones that we want to have them remain on the field, right? So yeah, this is a fantastic card that gives a lot of protection for our film type cards. Unfortunately, it is film specific, so we can't really splash this into other purple decks, but in this particular deck, it is very good. And then last but not least, we do have 4 copies of Lion's Threat Imperial Earthbind. So 3 costs to play. This is just a main event ability. Oh, I forgot to mention, on the Union Armada, there's a trigger, add 1 Dawn from your Dawn deck and set it as active. So if you do want some of that ramp and it comes as out of life, you can do that. Honestly, I would maybe keep 1 or 2 of these in hand, then kind of trigger the rest, depending on how the game goes. But that's a good trigger ability, and very similar to the one that we have here. But I digress. So back to this particular event. So main Dawn -2. So return 2 Dawn from the field onto the Dawn deck. KO up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 5 or less. So honestly, this obviously is balanced out. 3 costs to play, so cheap, but it does require Dawn -2. But to delete something or to KO something with a cost 5 or less is pretty good. And honestly, I think this is one of the things that the purple color of One Piece has been missing, is some sort of cheap-ish removal. in the form of an event card. And then this also has a trigger ability, trigger, add 1 Dawn card from your Dawn deck and set it as active. So very similar to the trigger ability from Armada Union, or Union Armada. But anyway, that is my optimized film starter deck, purple Shanks starter deck. Let me know in the comments down below what you think about it. I know there might be some choices that I made that y'all don't necessarily agree with, especially the Guild Tesoro sort of ratio, right? But I think this is a pretty solid way to sort of optimize the starter deck for the starter deck meta, and then maybe even beyond that. And like I mentioned before, this particular starter deck has a lot of good cards individually that can be splashed into sort of the more generic purple decks that don't require sort of like, tribal or crew support. Maybe something like a king deck, which is a bit of a spoiler for what I'm going to record next. So if you want to stay in tune for when that comes out, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and if you enjoyed the video, please give it a like. It helps out with, the ever elusive algorithm, but also helps me to know that you are enjoying the content. But I think that'll do it for me, so thank you so much for watching, really appreciate it, and captains, remember, build what you like, play what you love, and I'll catch you in the next video. Have a good one.